let's go ahead and react to CZsWorld's The Complete History of Freddy Krueger.
Freddy Krueger, later known as Fred, or most commonly Freddy, was born in the early 1940s as the son of a nun named Amanda Krueger. She was part of a religious order that ran an asylum known as Weston Hills and did volunteer work there from time to time. When Amanda was young, she was accidentally locked in a ward for the criminally insane over the holidays, and the inmates kept her hidden for days. When she was found, she was barely alive and now pregnant with a child.
Freddy, the bastard son of 100 maniacs.
So basically, the origin story of Freddy is his mother was a nun at a psychiatric ward, and she was locked in a room full of 100 insane patients and basically had a child, and that is Freddy Krueger. So Freddy Krueger is the bastard child of 100 criminally insane patients.
Who the true biological father is, it was probably this guy, just based on their similar appearance. According to Alice Johnson's research on Freddy, Amanda gave birth at that very same asylum. I imagine she delivered the baby here as opposed to a normal hospital out of shame, since nuns are supposed to be celibate. She was panicked throughout the entire childbirth, and the baby was a breech, meaning that he was going to come out feet first instead of head first. There's probably some symbolism surrounding the fact that Freddy was born upside down, with the mother being a nun and an upside down cross being associated with the devil. Because through his disastrous life experiences and eventual demonic intervention, Freddy would indeed become the antithesis to God. To learn about Freddy's childhood, how he became the Demon of Dreams, the timeline I pieced together using bits of information throughout the franchise, how he represents various scientific sleep phenomena, and what the future now holds for Freddy Krueger, stick around to the end of this video. There's clinical research to back this. The rate of abuse among individuals with a history of abuse is approximately 6 times higher. By his teenage years, Freddy learned to embrace the pain, going so far as to slice himself with a razor while laughing just for entertainment. By this point, taking the belt from his adopted father was nothing to him, and he mockingly thanks him for the lashes.
You want to know the secret of pain? If you just stop feeling it, you can start using it.
Is there any basis in reality for this? I think this is obviously an exaggerated version of a real concept, and that concept is masochism, or the tendency to derive pleasure from one's own pain or humiliation. And masochism is often associated with bedroom activities. We can only theorize as to why people develop this condition. There are a number of theories out there, which I have read about for the video, guys, for the video, one of which is linked to trauma. The idea is that the victim of the trauma, in this case Freddy, is finding a way to take control of this pain that was previously out of his control as a coping mechanism. It's basically the same idea as when someone says, "You can't fire me, I quit."
You can't put me on hold! I'll put you on hold!
I think it's an interesting thing to keep in mind as we continue forward in his story, because while it's never explicitly said outright, there are some clues that there may be a carnal side to his slashings in Springwood. But despite all of his issues, or maybe because of them, he manages to find a wife named Loretta, and together.
Okay, so basically the reason Freddy Krueger is able to take so much pain in his human form in his early days is because of a coping mechanism that he basically built. Basically saying, you know, whenever his father or anyone else abused him, he kind of emotionally checked out. And so he never really felt any pain. His body was there, but emotionally he had checked out, so he really didn't feel the pain, if that makes sense.
Together, they have a daughter, Catherine Krueger, who was born in 1958. And I know this because we're told that Catherine was taken away from him in 1966, and her adoption papers state that she was adopted at 8 years old.
So, Freddy Krueger has a daughter. Her name is Catherine Krueger. She was born in 1958, but was taken away from him in 1966 at the age of 8 years old.
Family lived together on Elm Street. It was at some point during Catherine's life that Fred began kidnapping and killing children in town, earning himself a new nickname, the Springwood Killer. Yeah, keep working on that one, Springwood Gazette headline writers. Freddy also crafted his own glove, using a blowtorch and some welding tools in his basement. For each victim he took, he documented the moment in a scrapbook, as well as an array of souvenirs that he kept in his basement workshop. One day, Catherine moseyed into the basement where her father kept newspaper clippings, photos, and other evidence of his crimes. It seems early on, he had an array of prototype gloves in addition to the finger blade glove that we all know and love, like one with shorter knives seemingly taped to his fingertips, one with nails affixed to his knuckles, and one with shorter curved claws that looks to be made of copper. While Catherine is browsing through all of this, Freddy is up in the backyard, shaking and beating Loretta for discovering his secret collection. He would indeed take Loretta's life over this, but he covered it up well enough to make police think that she had just gone missing. Mrs. Krueger, wife of Fred Krueger, just disappeared without a trace, according to Detective Smith of the Springwood Police Department.
So, apparently, there's this newspaper clipping where Freddy Krueger was investigated for the murder of his wife, but apparently she just disappeared without a trace, according to Detective Smith of the Springwood Police Department. Now, I ain't no detective, but Detective Smith, we need your badge, please.
I mean, did they not check his basement? Something tells me this Detective Smith is maybe not Springwood's brightest. Freddy did find out that his daughter also stumbled across the room, but he seemed satisfied with letting her live and just threatening her not to tell anyone. This would eventually come back to bite him in the nose, but not for many more years. Catherine was relocated to the orphanage in 1966, but Freddy would go on terrorizing the town for a couple years, and the body count would continue to pile higher. Then there was his job.
Wow, what is this place?
Fred Krueger worked here. It's an old power plant.
This is how Freddy managed to evade police as long as he did. I'm guessing after the scare with Loretta, Freddy decided it was too risky to continue working out of his home and instead took the kidnapped kids to the boiler room at this power plant. It's estimated that he took 20 to 30 kids.
It drove us crazy when we didn't know who it was.
I don't know, maybe the weird guy whose wife disappeared and whose daughter was confiscated by the states? Anyway, it took a couple years, but police finally had that big brain moment and arrested Frederick Krueger in 1968.
So Freddy Krueger was arrested in 1968 for the murder of all those children for all those years while he was human. Now, again, this is pre him becoming Freddy Krueger of what we know today with the burnt face and the gloves and all that good stuff. So make sure you go follow CZsWorld. He has some amazing content as far as horror. And this is the complete history of Freddy Krueger at Nightmare on Elm Street, part 1 and possibly part 2. We'll do part 3 in another video.
I know this because this newspaper in the Dream Child announces the death of Freddy's mother and says he was recently arrested in connection with the Springwood child murders. And Amanda Krueger's grave says that she died in 1968. Freddy was put on trial, but in the end, someone didn't sign the search warrant in the right place and Krueger was set free just like that. The public was furious, with headlines reading, "Child molester acquitted, citizens outraged." And this is actually the only place where Freddy is directly accused of being more than just a child killer. But there are more covert clues, which I will go over as we go along. I'd imagine that he was suspected of both, but the prosecution just wanted to focus on the murder charges because that was their strongest case. In real life, Freddy actually was supposed to be a molester in an early version of the script for the first movie, but they dropped that part around 1982 or 1983 when some high-profile cases involving a daycare started making news cycles, and producers didn't want it to look like they were exploiting that. If you watch.
So apparently in the original script written by Wes Craven, there was clues that hinted at Freddy Krueger being a PDF file. Now, I don't know what you guys think about that. Me personally, I'm kind of glad they took that out of the story because, you know, sometimes horror can be a little much. And as far as Freddy Krueger being a PDF file, that is way over the line. Now, if you want to make him a child killer, totally fine with that because, again, this is horror. You know, we can do things like that other genres can't do, but being a PDF file, absolutely not.
Watch my channel, you know that this isn't the only time that director Wes Craven was censored due to current events. See my video on Scream 3. Anyway, when the law failed to take down Krueger, the parents of Elm Street decided to take things into their own hands.
We found him in an old abandoned boiler room where he used to take his kids. Took gasoline. Poured it all around the place and made a trail of it out the door.
After that, all they had to do was toss a Molotov cocktail through the window and watch the fireworks. Yet, by some divine prank, Freddy had been chosen by a higher power. Maybe they saw potential in him because of his ability to ignore pain, or maybe it was merely his infamy and notoriety in Springwood that made him an ideal candidate. But in his final moments, Freddy is approached by 3 dream demons who offer him the opportunity to become eternal.
Freddy, we know what you want. I want it all! Of course you do.
Then open up.
And you shall be forever!
Not much is known about the dream demons, but they seem to go back to ancient Greek times, suggesting that Freddy's new role as a dream spirit could almost be like a second coming of Epialus, the Greek demon of nightmares. The word Epialus means feverish chill, or daemon who assaults sleeper.
So apparently, Freddy Krueger was approached by 3 demons when he was getting murdered by the town of Springwood. He was approached by 3 demons, and the demons said, "We will give you what you want, the power that you have always craved, if you just let us in." And that is how Freddy Krueger got his abilities.
The dream demons themselves are depicted outside of the Temple of Morpheus, Morpheus being the Greek god of dreams and nightmares.
These are ancient dream demons. Supposedly they roam the dreams of the living, so they find the most evil, twisted human imaginable. Then they give them the power to cross the line and turn our nightmares into reality.
In any event, there's a lot of controversy regarding Krueger's death, and each headline seemed to tell a different story. Some say he died in a fire, others suggest suicide, while some detail a vigilante-style killing. The parents hid his remains at Penny Bros Auto Salvage, somewhere that they knew nobody would find his bones, because nobody ever salvages anything from an auto salvage. Finally, one woman, Marge Thompson, took the knife-clawed glove and hid it in her basement as some kind of reassurance that it wouldn't fall back into the wrong hands. All seemed well for a few years, but then children started dying off again. There's an in memoriam section at the high school, which seems to begin with 3 deaths in 1975, 7 years after Freddy was burned to death.
So there are deaths that are happening after Freddy Krueger's death in I believe it was 68 that he died, I believe he said. But the first 3 deaths of Freddy Krueger was Daniel Warren, class of 1975. We have Jennifer Black, class of 1975. And Glenn Bronson, class of 1975. And the list goes on and on and on from 75, it looks like 76, 78, and 1980.
The problem just seemed to get worse from then on, but I'd imagine that nothing could really be done because nobody knew what was causing these deaths. To an outsider, these may have appeared to be cases of SUNS, or sudden unexpected nocturnal death syndrome. This was a phenomenon observed in Southeast Asian refugees in the early 80s, where seemingly healthy young men just died in their sleep. This syndrome is actually what inspired Craven to write A Nightmare on Elm Street. In an interview with Vulture, he recounted how he read about a boy from Cambodia who was afraid he'd be attacked in his dreams and never wake up. When he finally fell asleep, his parents thought this crisis was over. Then, they heard screams in the middle of the night. By the time they got to him, he was dead. He died in the middle of a nightmare. While the adults didn't have much in the way of a logical explanation, the kids passed down a nursery rhyme through each generation, warning of the haunting of Freddy.
I remember that song as a child fucking terrified me. Anytime someone played that song or started to sing that song, it just terrified me.
Is the most intriguing. 5-6, grab your crucifix, which seems to compare Freddy to some kind of anti-Christ figure that you can protect yourself against using a cross, much like a vampire. But is this the case, or is it just urban legend? In March 1981, Nancy Thompson, the daughter of the woman who confiscated Freddy's fingerblade glove, would find out for herself. But this is the point where I have to pause and explain the timeline a little bit more. These movies don't often reference the dates, so I had to do a little puzzle solving. One of the few concrete dates is June 1989, when the graduation ceremony occurs in A Nightmare on Elm Street 5. From there, we can work backwards. In Elm Street 4, Alice has a driver's license, so at the earliest, this is 1987. Kristen's tombstone states that she was born in 1969, and she's still in high school, which means at the latest, it's 1987. So Elm Street 4 takes place in 1987, and this is backed up by the poster for the movie Prison, which came out in 87. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 takes place a little bit before the 4th one, altogether in the fall. So Dream Warriors is most likely spring or summer of that same year. And in Dream Warriors, Nancy says this. Roll it.
6 years ago, he killed my friends.
Which means the original A Nightmare on Elm Street took place in 1981. And according to Nancy's diary, which is found in the second movie, the weird dreams began around March 15th.
March 15th. He comes to me at night. Horrible, ugly, dirty. Under the sheets with me. Tearing at my nightgown with his steel claws. His name is Fred. And he keeps trying to take me to the boiler room. He wants to kill me.
So apparently, all of the Nightmare on Elm Street killings happen within like a 10-year period from the original Nightmare on Elm Street to A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5. So that means Freddy Krueger did a lot of killing really fucking fast.
Why does he want to kill her? It's really pretty simple. The more children's souls he collects, the more powerful he becomes. And he also needs to make himself known as an urban legend in order to strike fear into the town. Because if people forget about him, he'll be in danger of losing the power to invade dreams.
The children still feared me, and I afforded them the power to invade their dreams.
So in March 1981, he chooses 4 new targets in his old neighborhood on Elm Street: Nancy Thompson, Tina Gray, Rod Lane, and Glenn Lantz. And each of them have dreams where Freddy begins his scare tactics. Tina's dream includes the appearance of a lamb in a damp hallway, which represents the sacrificial lamb found in many religions, a clue about her becoming the first sacrifice of the friend group. From there, she goes to the boiler room, which is Freddy's main domain. She's cornered in front of a furnace, flames blazing behind her. This room represents hell, and Freddy represents the devil that presides over it. Like something that could only happen in a nightmare, Freddy suddenly appears behind her, and she awakens with a scream, finding her nightgown torn. I think you could also look at the torn clothing as a more subtle way of Craven including the detail about Freddy also being a different type of predator when it comes to the minors that he's hunting. Nancy and Rod both experience similar dreams that night, so the next day both couples stay at Tina's. Nancy, at first glance, seems to be protected by the crucifix in the bedroom that she's staying in because Freddy seems to retract after starting to cross the threshold. Tina, on the other hand, would not be so lucky and finds herself in another nightmare scenario. Freddy lures Tina into an alley using a mysterious voice, then, after rolling a trash can lid in her direction to startle her, reveals his horrifying appearance, arms extended unnaturally to scrape the wall with his bladed glove. Tina's first reaction is to seek help in God, but Freddy, persistently in opposition to religion, mocks her God with his response.
Please, God.
This is God.
He chases her back to the house, demonstrating the ability to warp around the dream scene, slice off his own fingers with no pain, and have his face torn away. Remember, he's been doing this for some time at this point, and has already developed tricks to terrify and torture his victims.
Yeah, so at this point, it's 1981. He's been killing for at least 20 plus years, so he knows what he's doing.
Using dream logic. He pins her down and slashes her through the chest before dragging and tossing her body all around the room. The others are woken up by the commotion and don't manage to get any sleep after seeing the scene, so it isn't until the next day that Freddy is able to target Nancy, who falls asleep in class. Freddy is able to manipulate the dreams of his victims, so he causes Nancy to see her best friend in a body bag, the first in a trail of breadcrumbs that he uses to draw her in. He shapeshifts into a hall monitor, who she runs into on her way to the basement, which turns out to be none other than Freddy's boiler room. Freddy emerges from behind the boiler and slices his own chest just as he used to as a boy, but this time it reveals maggots and green ooze. He laughs maniacally as he chases her around, but unlike Tina, Nancy manages to wake herself up at the end by reaching for a hot pipe. But thanks to the power given to him by the dream demons, any injuries that he dishes out in dreams also carry through to real life, and Nancy wakes up realizing that the burn is real. Not to be deterred, Freddy continues to haunt Nancy's dreams whenever she falls asleep, like when she dozes off in the bathtub and he pulls her under the surface, once again hinting at that metaphor that the studio didn't want to include blatantly. In another dream, Freddy visits Rod, who's being held in jail as a suspect in Tina's death. He gives chase, continuing to use images of Tina to torture her, but ultimately, Nancy's alarm clock saves her. Perhaps wanting an easier target, or perhaps realizing it'll have a psychological effect on Nancy if another one of her friends dies, Freddy turns his efforts to Rod, kills him in his dream, and stages it as a suicide. He goes for another round with Nancy after this. However, I don't have the details because we see this dream from an outside perspective while Nancy is being studied at the Katya Sleep Institute. However, it must have been pretty traumatic because she wakes up with a fresh trio of cuts on her arm, a strand of gray hair, and a souvenir.
I brought something out from my tree.
At some point the next night, Freddy calls the phone in her bedroom. She's expecting to hear from her boyfriend, Glenn, but it turns out to be more of a nuisance call.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
A tongue protrudes out of the receiver and licks her, causing her to spike the phone and destroy it.
Again, you could just see the elements that Wes Craven originally put in the Nightmare on Elm Street original script, right? As far as the PDF file goes. I mean, the tongue licking Nancy, the bathroom scene with the hand coming out of the water. I mean, it was written all over. And again, I'm just glad that they decided not to go that route. It's just too much.
That's still preferred to getting a telemarketer though. It wouldn't be the last time that Freddy used his tongue to freak out a victim, and it all ties into the inappropriate subtext of his character. But Nancy isn't even asleep for this, so how did Freddy get to her in the waking world? At this point, Nancy is running on empty. She's mostly stayed awake 24/7 for the last few days, and her body really needs sleep. There's something called hypnagogic hallucination, also known as waking dreams. These are brief hallucinations that take place as you're falling asleep. They can be visual, auditory, or physical. You may have experienced this in a minor capacity. You're about to fall asleep and you hear someone say your name, but there's nobody there. Or you hear your phone buzz, but there's no notification. Wow. So I think that's what's happening to Nancy here. Her body is shutting down and those hallucinations are starting to happen while she's still awake, allowing Freddy to affect her in the real world in a minor way. But meanwhile, across the street, Glenn has fully fallen asleep, and just like Nancy was pulled underwater in the bath, Freddy pulls Glenn down into a void in his bed. Moments before a fountain of blood explodes from it, completely repainting the ceiling of his room. With all three of Nancy's friends now dead, Freddy uses them against her as she intentionally travels back into Dreamland, hoping to bring Freddy out into the real world with her. As she travels down into the boiler room, she hears echoes of her dead friends calling to her and Freddy's laughter as he taunts her. He stalks her from around corners as she goes deeper into the boiler room, eventually chasing her through dream space back to her house, but to his surprise, instead of running from him, she tackles him, just before her alarm goes off and takes her back to the world of the awake. I don't want to get too picky here because none of this is real, but I feel like if Freddy Krueger was real, that this plan wouldn't work, because clocks never seem to work properly in a dream. And also, you can have a dream that feels really long, but it was actually pretty short in real world time. They do an amazing job of conceptualizing this in the movie Inception.
Facts. Have you ever been asleep and have a dream and the dream feels like it's been fucking days or fucking hours and you were only asleep for 15 minutes? Dream time, dream world time is insane. I don't get it.
Anyway, Freddy is carried through, back into the real world for the first time in 13 years. But that's not gonna stop him from going after her, only he finds that in this world, everything has been rigged with traps. He opens a locked door only to be gut-checked with a hammer, trips over a wire that sets off an exploding light bulb, and gets bombarded with a jug of kerosene to set the stage for a Freddy-flavored barbecue. But this is nothing that he hasn't dealt with before. The now flaming Freddy stays hot on her heels, literally, but he's door-checked back down the stairs. Still, he's somehow able to break out of the basement and sneak past Nancy, up the stairs, and into the room of Nancy's mother, Marge, one of the parents responsible for killing him the first time and stealing his gloves.
I still believe that Marge had a secret relationship with Freddy Krueger. I don't know how to explain it, but I do believe that to be true.
Still ablaze, he strangles her in her sleep until Nancy finds him and breaks a chair over his back. But when the flames are extinguished by Nancy's dad, they see Marge's charred remains sink back into the dreamscape, with Freddy nowhere to be found. My interpretation is that since Freddy found Marge asleep, he was able to use her to escape back into the world of dreams, taking her life in the process. But this battle is not over yet. As Nancy takes a moment to herself in her room, Freddy takes the opportunity to stretch the fabric of reality, and apparently the fabric of this bedsheet, once more. But this time, Nancy seems to have him figured out.
You think you was gonna get away from me?
I know you too well now, Freddy.
Nancy is finally able to divest him of his power by turning away and depriving him of the energy he needs by refusing to believe he's real or be afraid. As he tries to stab her in the back, he disintegrates into a cosmic shadow and disappears.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Hellcats and Hounds, that has been part 1 of the Nightmare on Elm Street, the history of Freddy Krueger, presented to you by CZsWorld, where your Hellmaster Hellzone reacts to it. And I'm gonna say that this one was really fun. Shout out to CZsWorld. Make sure you go give them a follow. What are your thoughts? Did you learn anything new today about Freddy Krueger? I for sure learned a couple things. I learned that Freddy Krueger is one hell of a killer, for sure. Let me know down in the comments below. Did you learn anything? I'm your Hellmaster Dede, and I'll see you Hellcats and Hellhounds in the next one. Peace.